Good morning, everyone. Am I audible? Hello. Good morning, everyone. It gives me immense pleasure to welcome you all to the inaugural session of the IILM University's Samvaad series. The world is witnessing pockets of many warfares. There are geopolitical conflicts happening in West Asia, South China Sea, and of course with the Russia-Ukraine crisis in the Europe. Tensions between the United States and China is worsening. The world order, as we knew of, as we studied in our textbooks, is over. Similar is India's position in the world order. As the world's largest democracy, as its most populous nation, India is uniquely positioned to advocate for those countries with a shared history of colonization, the marginalized countries in international politics, the ones who are not yet represented in the United Nations Security Council. This raises the pertinent question, is India becoming the voice of those countries? Is India becoming the voice of the global South? With no further ado, it's my great special pleasure to introduce Ambassador Rajiv Bhatia, a distinguished diplomat with a 37-year career in the Indian Foreign Service. He has served as ambassador to Myanmar and Mexico, as Indian High Commissioner to Kenya, South Africa, and Lesotho. A prolific writer, a speaker on foreign policy, he is currently a distinguished fellow at the Gateway House. Sir, we are truly honored to have you here as a distinguished speaker of the inaugural address of IILM Samvaad series. On behalf of all the faculty, staff, and students of IILM, I welcome you with great pleasure. Thank you, sir. Thank you. It's a delight to also welcome Dr. Nihar Amonkar, the Pro-Vice Chancellor of IILM University, Greater Noida, a change maker in Indian education, and the force behind this whole multidisciplinary dialogue series to kindly deliver the welcome address.
I'm never going to live up to the expectation of that introduction. But thank you, Dr. Swani, who is actually the curator of this series. Why the Samvaad, right? Why do we have this IILM Samvaad series? Is it just another platform for us to demonstrate, okay, we can call the very best in a particular domain to our institute? No. I remember that when I entered into my undergraduate education, I received a very important advice from my father, who was a civil servant. And he said that, Nihar, what do you think you're going to learn by the end of these 3 years of undergraduation? I told him that I was going to pursue a Bachelor's of Arts in Public Administration, and like many others, wanted to get into civil service. I said that I will learn everything that I need to know to answer the prelims and the mains. Thankfully, there was no CSAT then. And that was it. He said, no, you're not. You're looking at it in a very narrow perspective. So I said, what am I expected to do then in those 3 years? He said, these 3 years you learn about life, Nihar. Okay. And I said, obviously I was 16 years old, 17 years old. Life has a very narrow meaning at that time. So he said, one thing that you should not do in these 3 years is close your mind to anything. He's like, the moment you keep your mind open, you will let anything and everything that is useful and not useful to you flow into it. Your only job is to keep what is useful and throw out what is not useful. And what that meant is that in the very first year of my education, I got guidance from him to read different things. I was a student of science in my 11th, 12th, but I read Oscar Wilde. I read a lot of English literature. I read a lot of texts in geopolitics. I read about the cooperative movement of India. And what that did to me is that it gave me a very unique perspective about the country that I live in. And it gave me a better understanding of the realities of the people that are around me. And believe it, when I say it, that today, in whatever position we find ourselves in, it is that knowledge which comes to me, and it is that education that comes of use to me than anything else. Because everything that we talk about today in management education, empathy, the compassion, etc., where does it all come from? It comes from an innate understanding of the people around you, right? So this Samvaad series is to open up this dimension of education, right? So the advice that I got from my father is somewhere filtered down into this thought process that we need to bring in students. And when you sit in here, you are not part of School of Management or School of Liberal Arts, or you're not a part of School of Law. You are hungry to listen to what is going to be spoken about here today. You are not a part of a narrow course or a narrow program or a narrow school. You are much broader than that, correct? And here is the time wherein you have a distinguished speaker who's going to address you in the next hour. And at the end of it, you can ask questions. And there is what we call as in boxing, no holds bar. You can be extremely open, candid, frank, but courteous in terms of your questioning. Here we want to open up those boxes in your mind which you normally would not open up in a classroom, wherein we have the confines of learning outcomes and time that we have to deal with. So I hope that this truly becomes a well of multidisciplinary thoughts, wherein students and faculties from across schools can really come in and immerse within topics that actually matter. For me, coming from the management background, why does Global South matter? We were just talking about it, and I got a validation from sir that the countries, Dr. Sheetal, that we are focusing on, Central Asia, West Asia, South Asia, right, and Africa, when it comes to internationalization, that is the route for us to go. So for us, it matters in terms of an institution. It matters, if you see the world of business, how it is growing in terms of the, its footprint in the Global South. Also, the growing role that India is playing in terms of improving the digital public infrastructure of the countries in the Global South. Not only representing them in the UN and elsewhere, but at the same time making tangible investments and impact through providing this digital public infrastructure, right? But this is not about me. This is just about hearing out a distinguished ambassador of 37 years of service, in the Indian Foreign Service. Somebody who I realize should have been in academia as well, and he confesses that if it was not the Foreign Service, he would have been in academia. So I could not imagine anybody else to come in and launch this inaugural series. So over to you, sir, and we are looking forward.
There are many reasons for it, but I'll only mention one. And this is that while I have spoken at many universities around the world, at least on 4 continents, Latin America, Europe, Asia, and Africa, it's very rare when I get a chance to speak in my own state, Uttar Pradesh. So I'm very happy to connect with you and those who are also, who may not necessarily be from UP, but I know that technology can take perhaps this presentation to well beyond the narrow confines of a state. I have to say that this subject has been given by the hosts. And I'm very happy that they thought of this subject. Is India shaping the voice of the global South? Because first of all, it's a relatively new subject and it contains a provocative question. And I suppose the whole purpose was that this should trigger some queries, some questions in our minds. So I respect the idea that this is a samvad, a dialogue. And naturally for a dialogue, first there has to be a presentation, the basic statement of propositions, and my own conceptualization of the very many aspects of this topic, and then only we can have a dialogue. So, Dr. Neha, with your permission, perhaps I could speak for about 30, 40 minutes, depending on how long I can hold the attention of our audience here. And then, of course, I'm open to questions and also comments and observations. Now, when you come to a university, the basic ground rule has to be that you're not giving a speech, you are giving a lecture. So it must be systematic, structured presentation so that at the end, some ideas at least are retained and absorbed. So I always follow this rule. Here is a presentation that I have prepared with the help of my wife, if I may add. She is more IT savvy than I am. And I would like to begin by presenting greetings of Gateway House. This is a boutique think tank based in Mumbai, specializing in international economic affairs and national security and foreign affairs. I've been working with them for past 6 years. Been a great delight to connect there with people of all specializations and ages. And of course, it goes without saying that I'm very grateful to IILM for this rare invitation. In terms of the initial remarks, I would like to say that whatever I am shaped by the two previous institutions for which I worked. On the left is South Block, Ministry of External Affairs, and on the right, the Indian Council of World Affairs, which is a very prestigious think tank of Ministry of External Affairs, and of course it is your university. So it's a way our Samvaad is going to connect all these institutions plus Gateway House, and we should always be grateful to our institutions because they really are the ones that have made us. You've already been introduced about my background, but I want to say that I'm speaking from a triangular objective or perspective. One is that I cannot forget I'm a former diplomat who has represented India around the world. So in effect, it's a view which will be essentially sympathetic to the government, a government which I represented for nearly 4 decades. Second, I see myself as a student of international affairs, national security, foreign policy, and diplomacy. You may call me a scholar, but I always have to remember that I'm a student. You are as good as you have studied today. It doesn't matter what PhD you did or more, but your knowledge has to be up to date and it has to be continuously growing, and therefore always I think it is important for me to say that I speak to you as a student. And finally, I cannot deny that I'm also an author. I've been privileged to have published 3 books with prestigious international publishers. And that has been a very special experience, because that was also acquiring additional knowledge and then sharing it with a large number of people. So today, my purpose is to present to you, knowing that some of you are perhaps from law, computer science, social sciences, business, and other domains, a subject which is gaining a lot of salience in the field of international affairs. So at the heart is India's world view. If we can understand India's world view, then it will be very easy to understand a lot of subjects as you discuss and study them. And here, without going too deeply into everything, we have to keep in mind that while India is a civilizational state, it has a 5,000-year-old history. But as young people of India, who are going to be the leaders tomorrow, we must be fairly well versed in India's history in the 20th century and in the 21st century. I may not ask you to list out all the 7 or 8 names of Mughal emperors or the Gupta dynasty, but surely, as Dr. Nihar just said, he studied the history of India's non-cooperation movement. That was very much the 20th century. So at least from the time when Mahatma Gandhi took charge of the freedom struggle, when he returned from South Africa, a country where he spent 3 years, from about 1915 to 2024, you must know your history of India in broad terms. And once you do that and you realize that we are now 77 years since independence and 74 years after the establishment of the Indian Republic, we are on the road to completing 100 years of independence and 100 years of the Republic. And all of you, young friends, will be witnessing those big landmarks, those big milestones in the journey of India. And you have to prepare for them, because when they arrive in 25 years, you all will be in the age group of 40 to 50. You will be holding positions. The country will expect you to lead it, and therefore we are here, Dr. Aswani, Dr. Nihar, your faculty members, to help you to shoulder that responsibility. So it's clear India is the world's largest democracy, and it is also a very successful democracy. Never go by what others say. You have seen, coming from villages, cities, urban towns of India, how seriously we take our elections, how seriously we take our media, our judiciary, our parliament, our political class. Democracy is alive and kicking. And this must come as a surprise to a lot of people back in 1947 or 50s who had said that democracy in India would never work. The country has belied them. Country has vindicated its interest and commitment to democracy. And I'm sure that this is a tradition that would continue. What is more important, India is now a successful economy as well, the 5th largest economy in the world. And you may have read, some of you, yesterday, that our finance minister said that India will become the 3rd largest economy by 2027. This morning papers again stressed that India is growing at 7% per annum rate. This is exceptionally important. This is the fastest growing large economy, and we should be proud of the fact that now we are absolutely on the right track in terms of political and economic progress. So in that light, a very quick view of what is our future vision, what is the vision of the leadership. And the leadership is very clear that we are working for a welfare state where the poor, the weak, the vulnerable are looked after. You are aware of very many programs that the government has launched. In many, many ways, they are touching people's lives. And all this has been done by using technology. And the more you think of what India has done in the field of technology, you cannot but feel proud of the fact that with this whole business of revolution in banking, revolution in the wallet payments, revolution through UPI, the availability of smartphones on a huge scale, the access to connectivity, all this has changed our lives. We hardly carry any currency notes in our pocket anymore, whether we are buying vegetables, or we are paying for the cinema ticket, or we are paying for our life insurance policy. It is all happening without cash, without check, without you going to the bank. If this is not revolution, I do not know what revolution would be. And therefore, in that internal domestic background, this is the time to fix our attention on the core domain for me, and this is India's foreign policy. Once again, this is not a lecture on India's foreign policy, but I think it is important for us to remember that a country's foreign policy is shaped by its domestic situation, and having studied clearly that we are a democracy, we are a fast growing economy, we have a future vision, and we want to rely on technology, we can say that foreign policy is meant to promote the development of India, and also very much make a contribution to the welfare of the world as well. So one of the key things to remember is India sees itself as a bridge between East and West and North and South. Now these are new terms to some of you, so this requires a very quick explanation. West we all know, the US and Europe mainly. Japan is also in that category. And so clearly we are not part of the West. Then there is East. East basically then is Eastern Europe and Asia, and naturally we are part of East. So East and West, a bridge between the two. Very often India is thought of that. And North and South, North again is seen as the area of the developed countries, the rich countries. And South is seen as the area of the developing countries or the poorer countries. And so once again, we see ourselves as a bridge between the North and the South. And I've added a half phrase saying that while all this is there, India is located in a very difficult neighborhood. So when some of you, especially those from social sciences, has inclination, you can study India's role in South Asia, and you can see how we are surrounded by smaller neighbors. Many of them are not even neighbors to each other. Look at Pakistan and Bangladesh, their borders don't meet. Look at Sri Lanka and Bhutan, their borders don't meet. If India is not there, they are not even neighbors. So what happens in South Asia, how India handles its relations with small neighbors, and how India copes with the intrusion of foreign influences, particularly China, that is a whole subject of independent study. I will not divert there, but I would just underline that neighborhood has to be studied in order to understand India's worldview. And a quick word about what exactly does India want. Certainly India wants its own development, yes. But what does it want for the world? Well, I think only two things, peace and development. And this particular slide has been prepared for you to show you what several pages of writing will not help you to understand. Prime Minister Modi is hugging three leaders: Putin of Russia, Biden of US, and Zelensky of Ukraine. I can't think of any other leader in the world who can do at this time. This is, of course, Prime Minister Modi's success and his skill in summit diplomacy, but it reflects India's central position in world affairs today. We have to appreciate that at a time when Europe is torn by conflict, on the one hand West, and on the other hand Russia, while most of the allies of these two camps are busy spending money to buy arms so that the war may be carried on and won, India's leaders say that, look, we are on the side of peace. India's leaders say that instead of spending money on arms, why don't you spend on schools and hospitals and roads and creating jobs? Because wherever there is war, whether it is Ukraine or West Asia, it leads to destruction. It does not lead to construction. And so this message of peace that India has given from the time of Buddha and Gandhi continues to be given now. And this slide, therefore, is perhaps worth reflecting upon. It doesn't, of course, necessarily mean that you have become a mediator on Ukraine. Don't please jump to that conclusion. Maybe someday we will. But as of now, the government's position is that we are willing to extend all possible assistance so that this war, the war in Ukraine, and also the war in West Asia come to an end, because wars do not solve any problems. And there are other elements of our future vision. We want to continue combating terrorism, and we want to bring changes in the global institutions. And finally, we want to concentrate not just on India, but on the needs and interests of the global South. Global South is equal to developing countries. And that is where our main story will start. But just quickly have a look at the second slide. This red line, it's called the Brandt line, and I'll explain what Brandt line is. But you can see the yellow portion is north, and south of the red line is the south. So what is global south? All the regions which are below the red line is the global south. So in your mental space, it should be clear that by and large, northern part, America, Canada, Europe, and that brings Russia also there, comes in, whereas south of the Brandt line, all the countries come in, but then again, China is also there, and we will raise questions about that separately. So foreign policy, I will not go too much today unless at question time you want. And I've said that there are certain fundamental tendencies which shape India's foreign policy, and India is busy handling itself as best as it can. This also shows how we deal with the great powers. I spoke earlier about India and South Asia, but here in terms of dealing with US, Russia, China, it is a continuous attempt to balance relationships. And dear friends, today is a very important day as we discuss this subject. When I left home about an hour and a half back, the historic meeting of Prime Minister Modi and President Xi Jinping of China was yet to take place. It may have taken place by now. As you know, they are meeting on the sidelines of the BRICS summit. And just 2 days earlier, some agreement was reached on the border patrolling and related issues. So there's a lot of excitement in the media and in the strategic community as to how this meeting, Modi-Xi Jinping meeting, will shape, number one, the bilateral relationship between India and China, the prospects of peace and stability in Asia, and also the future of BRICS, one of the major groupings in the world. So in a way, since now I'm sure you are a generation which does not read printed newspapers, but you are still ahead of us, because even as I am speaking, probably some of you will go and check on your iPad or on mobile as to whether the meeting has taken place, and you can tell me when we begin the question answer session as to what happened there. But I think the important thing is India's diplomacy or India's foreign policy is now based on multi-alignment. We have to navigate our relationships with the major powers, and we can say that today India is in a sweet spot when it comes to balancing the relationships. So with this somewhat detailed background, let me now come to the heart of the topic given to me, and this is the Global South, because obviously the hosts want me to talk about this. What is Global South? Scholars say it is a metaphor for underdevelopment, injustice, domination, colonial history, and the rest of it. You remember, after the Second World War ended, the whole world was divided into three parts. One was the Western Bloc led by US. The second was the Eastern Bloc led by the Soviet Union, the previous name for Russia, when Russia was a much bigger country. And in between came us, which was the non-aligned movement. So when the world was getting divided, the leaders of the developing countries, and the 5 top ones are there, you may not even be able to identify all of them, but you should. Jawaharlal Nehru, Nkrumah of Ghana, Nasser of Egypt, Sukarno of Indonesia, and Tito of Yugoslavia. It is an iconic photograph of the 50s when NAM was set up and the third way was invented. So please don't look confused when you see this picture. You need to know how in the 50s to 90s we were guided by the policy of non-alignment. And another part of that non-alignment movement was G77. G stands for group, 77 means the number of countries. G77 was a special grouping to promote the economic interests of the developing countries. So these were the groupings during that period. They still are alive, but they are not anymore very influential or effective. So that was the time when we didn't use the word Global South. We called it either NAM or G77. But fundamentally, we were referring to the same entity, which was the developing countries. Now, there is a kind of a return of the Global South, and particularly in the 80s, Willy Brandt was the Chancellor of West Germany. At that time, there were 2 Germanys, West Germany and East Germany. Later, they got reunited. So these 2 reports are mentioned, and anyone who's interested can later do a bit of study on that. And the other was Julius Nyerere, President of Tanzania, an important country in Africa. So these 2 people at different times talked about the challenges faced by developing countries and how this can be overcome through better North-South cooperation. So this was the story that went through the 80s and 90s, and I think it is important for us to say that the challenges faced by the developing countries were at the core of this agenda. But now I want to talk about the present. The phrase Global South has become now quite fashionable, and here we have to give a lot of credit to India, because India has brought this into a big fashion. And how this was done is a story I want to share with you. But maybe I should stop here for a minute and first share with you. I have many stories, but I would like to share very briefly one story, which is to show how diplomats can at human level connect with senior leaders. It is not that every day you get to talk to presidents and prime ministers, but this story relates to my time in South Africa. There, you remember, you must have heard the name Nelson Mandela, the famous South African and African leader. When he finished his presidency, he was replaced by Thabo Mbeki. So it was like a deputy to Mandela, who then became the president. So he was president in my time when I was the High Commissioner of India. One day at a reception, I met the president, and he said he was really not feeling very well, and he was suffering from cold, which was lingering. So completely on the spur of the moment, I said, Excellency, in your country, I have discovered an Indian South African concoction. So he was quite intrigued. He said, what is this mixture you're talking about, High Commissioner? So I said, South African green tea, which is called rooibos. I said, we take your tea and we put a bit of haldi from India into it, and it works wonders for cold. He said, really? He was quite puzzled. He said, but where I'm going to get haldi? So obviously, same afternoon, we arranged a special packet of haldi delivered to the presidential palace. And 3 or 4 days again, when I met the president, he specifically advanced towards me and he said, High Commissioner, it is working. So I was quite amused and grateful that an august man as he was, and he would have no problem of being access to the best medical treatment available in his country, but it was actually a traditional concoction which helped him. The reason why I brought this in is because when India was hosting the G20 summit from 22 to 23, the idea was how to use this great opportunity of leading G20 by projecting the needs and agenda of the developing countries. And that is when our diplomats thought of organizing a Voice of Global South Summit, VOGSS. This is where I think Dr. Aswani has taken the topic from, the Voice of Global South. So India hosted not 1 or 2, but 3 summits. And the great thing about these summits was that nobody came to Delhi. There was no money spent on it. It was entirely done digitally. I can say that probably these 3 summits were the biggest meetings, international conferences held online. So you can imagine if you're going to get 120 countries, presidents, prime ministers, ministers to take part, it's a massive logistical nightmare. And I know my colleagues in the ministry must have worked very hard. But the first summit was held in January 23, and the purpose was to consult the leaders of developing countries as to what should be India's approach to G20 and the presidency. And the second was done in November 2023, when our summit was over, to brief the developing countries leader as to how much we had achieved by bringing in our agenda onto the G20 agenda. And finally, August this year, this was to prepare for a big UN summit which was to take place last month. So India has almost copyrighted these international digital conferences. They proved very useful, and the participation by the leaders was very, very high. You know that the total number of countries in the world is 193. That is the number of member states of the UN. And out of them, 125 countries took part in the second VOGSS summit. So it was very, very representative. And India has every reason to be proud that we not merely shaped the voice, but we showed exceptional leadership of the Global South. This is a very useful slide because at the end of the day, you're going to ask me, sir, what does the Global South want? What is our agenda? And does it help me, a student here in university who's facing an uncertain life and an exciting life also? So I have researched all the papers, and this is my own listing of what Global South is trying to do. Please reflect on it, and we can, discuss now and later. But these are 6 major objectives that India is trying to achieve through the solidarity with the Global South. We want human-centric development, a subject our PM talks about it very often. It is not GDP-centric. It will not be enough if your GDP goes up. What is important is whether the happiness of the poor, vulnerable, weak section of society is going up. You and I probably can look after ourselves, the upper middle class, even lower middle class. But as per Mahatma Gandhi's talisman, the poorest face that you can think of, is he getting benefited? So this human-centric development is very important, including women-led development. This was very, very important, and the government put very special focus on this at G20. Energy transitions, we all know. The time of using traditional fuel, gas, petrol, oil is coming to an end. We will have to go into a situation where we use clean energy, and for that we need a lot of money and a lot of technology, and so this is being pushed, and therefore the third point, financing, is very important. The fourth, digital transformation and use of digital public goods. This is the signature tune of the government today. It is having its impact in India, and we are projecting it very actively in other countries. In fact, now many of them have started emulating India's example, and they are taking our technology so that what we have achieved can also be used there. And the last 2 are equally important. We want reform of the institutions, UN, Security Council, the rest of it, and we want complete global solidarity on countering terrorism, something that you all understand, as we read day after day incidents on our own border. So this is something very significant. So if that was the agenda, what are the challenges? And this is where we have to be very frank. It is not enough to say that India has done this, that, and the other, and India has produced a great agenda. Is it achievable? Or are there obstructions? Are there obstacles? Yes, a realistic note would say that there are challenges. First, we still have to disseminate the philosophy of the G125 or Global South in a more active manner. If our own people do not know enough about Global South, how are we going to disseminate it? So in a way, it's a very timely step that IILM has taken by creating awareness in our own country. Then there is no single platform now where Global South can operate. NAM is there, but outdated, as I mentioned. G77 is there, but outdated. India has created VOGSS, but this is still an Indian creation. Is BRICS the new platform for Global South? That raises questions. Because first, there is discussion among experts whether Russia and China truly belong to Global South. But that is something we can discuss separately. The important thing is there is no single platform. UN is, but then UN is for everybody, developed and developing countries. And then, yes, this is very important. The next point, there is competition for the leadership of Global South. Quite apart from China, there is India, but there are other countries such as Brazil, South Africa, Indonesia, Egypt. They all want to be leaders. If India claims that we are shaping the voice of the Global South, these countries also make similar claims. So we have to tread carefully so that we can take everybody together. And finally, the agenda cannot still be fulfilled because it needs a lot of funding, largely by the North or by the Western countries, by the richer countries. Therefore, this is where we are trying to overcome these challenges and move the Global South forward. Reaching towards the end, already Dr. Nehar had spoken about these three regions. They are very important, and I strongly recommended to him that at least in the beginning, if we can focus on getting students from these regions into IILM, it would be a great. At the end of the day, Africa is the core of Global South. This is the Indian government's view. I entirely agree. India managed to bring Africa's big body, African Union, into G20. This was a great achievement of India, and now African Union or Africa has to make full use of this opportunity. This slide is meant for you. Just look at the data. 193 member states of UN, 134 member states of G77, and 125 took part in our VOGSS 2. Sorry. So, conclusion, all this long story, what exactly are we trying to say? I think this is something that you might like to retain. Yes, the answer to the question on the topic, I think it's very important for a speaker to remember the topic and not be just flown by his own rhetoric. The answer is yes. India is shaping the voice of Global South. At the same time, it is important to remember that Global South needs more solidarity and collective leadership. Gone are the days when one single leader could really fly the flag. We need a collaborative approach, and it is in that context, if I may say, the developments of the last 2-3 days, a bit of a beginning of India-China reset in relations must be seen. And finally, as I said again and again, agenda can only be implemented if there is very serious money available, and it is for Global South to keep attempting to persuade the North to part with more money through North-South cooperation projects, but also through South-South cooperation projects. So India, for example, has to set aside a lot of money for supporting Africa and other regions. Finally, if any of you is interested further in this subject, this is a document you should have a look, Pact of the Future. This is the UN summit's outcome, will be useful. And yes, it is not to project myself as High Commissioner in South Africa. You can see Nelson Mandela, but look at what he said. This is a quotation from his famous biography, autobiography. And he said, after climbing a great hill, one only finds that there are many more hills to climb. This is a message, my young friends, to all of you. You're doing the first degree is only the first hill that you're climbing. You will have many more hills to climb, and remember, you can do it if you believe in yourself. Thank you very much.
Dear sir, thank you so much for an enlightening conversation. I'm sure we have students from different disciplines here, and I'm sure it was beneficial and awe-striking for many of you. Now we keep the floor open for Q&A, and I encourage all of you, despite your different backgrounds, to please post the questions. Please introduce yourself.
Good afternoon, sir. First of all, we are very thankful for your we are very thankful for your we are very thankful for your presence in the Samvaad series. So I want to ask you a geopolitical question related to China. So how India see the string of pearls theory? String of pearls theory.
So first of all, we have to explain what this theory is. String of pearls is an old doctrine which says that China has been securing various ports and military bases around India so that India's influence. Okay. So let us first explain very briefly the string of pearls theory. And this is basically to say that China has been setting up various strategic ports and other bases around India in order to curb the rise of India and curb the influence of India. And in this context, ports in Myanmar, Sri Lanka, Pakistan, and further Afar, Djibouti, etc. are mentioned. Some experts agree to this doctrine, others don't. The central point here is as to what is happening in the Indian Ocean. In the Indian Ocean, there is a serious maritime or naval rivalry is underway now. Earlier, the US used to be the dominant navy in the area. Now, Chinese presence has been growing, and in that context, naturally, India is also busy strengthening its presence and activities. On top of that, now, given the larger happenings in the larger region called Indo-Pacific region, which stretches from at least Japan to Indian Ocean, the four countries, US, India, Japan, and Australia, they have been collaborating in the naval sector. In fact, you would have read once again recently, right now actually, naval exercises are going on. So the short point is the doctrine that you mentioned is quite dated now. The fact is that there is rivalry. On the one side, there is China, and on the other side, there are US, India, and their friends. So clearly, we have to see how there is a decent balance of power so that no conflicts take place. Okay?
Thank you. My question is regarding these various forums that India initiates, India is part of. So there there are dialogues happening in these forums, and one of the basis of success of these forums is kind of number of people who are presenting in the forum, but also the kind of discussions that are happening. The recent forums that India has started, what do you think is the course of discussions? When can that be, these discussions be really political? Especially looking at the condition of the Central Asia, there is a lot of, there are forums there that discuss the issues in that particular area, and sometimes those forums have more importance than the UN forums also, because the sessions at Samarkand happened, and there were no, everybody had eye on that particular forum. When is it that you think, how long will it for us to take, and what is the role of an institution building students to have those kind of inputs which are really political in nature? Because at this time we are doing a soft negotiation, the diplomacy is really soft, but what about those strong political diplomacy in and when is India going to become that voice? Thank you.
Thank you very much. No, I agree that the international situation is not simple. It's a complex situation. And especially for many of you who have not studied foreign policy or international relations, we need to focus on 2 or 3 aspects. One is that there is multilateralism as represented by the UN. And this is, there is consensus that UN is not able to fulfill its role for a variety of reasons. UN now held in September this Summit of the Future, and it has produced this document, and some of you should have a look at least at the main points of that document so that you understand what exactly is the whole world worried about. It is worried about sustainable development, about international peace and security, about global reforms, about economic growth and the rest of it. Then moving beyond UN, you have now various plurilateral groupings. And I think I can mention 2 or 3. One is G20, which is a forum of both rich and emerging economies and developing countries. And you have read a lot about G20 because last year media was completely full of reports on G20. Then you have BRICS, which is a smaller body. It began with 4 countries, then they became 5. Last year, they became 10, with some caveat about Saudi Arabia. So BRICS is now BRICS 10. And today, as we speak, leaders sitting in Kazan, Russia, are deciding whether to bring in more countries into BRICS. So tomorrow, when you see the papers, you may have an answer whether BRICS is going to be BRICS 15 or BRICS 20 or God knows what. So BRICS has become a very important platform because this is of all the non-Western powers. There is no US, Japan, France, Germany there. And it is this light, India did the innovation of producing the forum that I mentioned, VOGSS, Voice of Global South Summit. And yes, you are right. It was very difficult to organize it, but there was a political session in each of the 3 summits where only the presidents and prime ministers participated, and they talked about politics. They talked about the broader political issues. And so if any of you are interested, it's a very good thing to remember that one of the best websites on foreign policy that you can imagine is the website of the Ministry of External Affairs. And if you are savvy enough, you can see the press releases on the 3 summits. And at one place, in a matter of 30 minutes, you can read them and immediately understand as to what these 125 countries were trying to do. And then it will strike you how challenging and daunting the task was, which was done by Indian diplomats. So, Madam, it is a combination of the politicians, the political leaders, and diplomats. But you are quite right in pointing out that we have to go step by step and understand the working of these international groupings. Thank you.
Thank you for very enlightening lecture, sir. My name is Manish. I teach history here. Sir, I want to ask you one thing about this foreign policy, which is shaped in a very new version way for the last 10 years in this government. Because before that, when I was a student, I tried to read newspaper in that way. And I find it now the common people is more find him associate with this foreign policy idea which is put forwarded by this government, especially Prime Minister Modi. Before that, common man hasn't do much about what is happening in the foreign policy. Now in the democratic setup in this elections, he has some say about the foreign policy when he's going for the vote or she is going for the vote. So this is happening everywhere. This is happening. We see in the parliamentary elections. We see in the assembly elections. This is one part of my thing. How you see this process is happening with the foreign policy. Second is that I just come across with the article by C. Raja Mohan. He just mentioned this new term by new internationalism. New internationalism, which is about the recent visit of Mr. Rahul Gandhi to as a leader of opposition to visit USA, and then again Prime Minister visits to the USA. So how Rahul Gandhi criticized his government in the foreign land, and how Minister Modi attacked on him on the foreign land is opposition leader. So how you see this crux of this, our leaders on the foreign policy issues and on the democratic setup? I need your comments.
Thank you. So you got the question?
No, it's very good, very solid questions. So on the first question, we have to note that the communication technology has undergone a big change. When I was a student at university, which was 50 years back, very active foreign policy prime ministers were there, Jawaharlal Nehru and then Indira Gandhi. But we got to read and learn about foreign policy in the next day's newspapers, and that too in a very limited manner. Then 10 years later, when I had taught at Meerut College for 3 years as a lecturer, as a young lecturer, I used to take MA classes, and another 7 years into the Indian Foreign Service, television revolution was taking place. So suddenly, more information on foreign policy became available through television, which was wonderful. Now the present generation, this is the digital generation. It is where, as I mentioned, you can get information on telephone, iPad, and social media. So we don't even have to read newspapers to know what happened at BRICS summit probably 30 minutes back. You don't have to wait for Times of India to appear tomorrow to know as to what is the substance. Some scholar or the other will send a message on Twitter today. So if we remember this journey, we can say that by and large itself, the role of technology has brought foreign policy closer home. At the same time, I think we should also recognize that the leader's role matters a great deal. If you have a leader who is not interested too much on foreign policy, I don't name some of the previous prime ministers, but they were more interested at home. But undoubtedly, in my considered view, Mr. Narendra Modi is the foreign policy PM. He enjoys connecting with the foreign leaders. He has a special knack and talent to do so. And I deliberately chose those 3 slides to show you that at least today I can't think of any other leader who could have connected with these 3, 2 of them belonging to one camp and the third belonging to a rival camp. So that is the contribution that the Prime Minister has really made. On your second question, There was a time when there was a tradition that politicians of this country would present a united front outside India, and they could do whatever criticism they wanted to do of the government policies, but on Indian soil. I'm afraid that era is over now. There is a certain degree of permissiveness. Once again, social media is doing it. If Mr. Rahul Gandhi goes to Atlanta and says something, and papers will report 2 or 3 days or a week later, nobody would bother. But as he is speaking, it is live streaming to you sitting here in Noida. So information revolution has taken place. You cannot do anything about it. Therefore, without causing any political controversy, I would say that today we are living in a pure information age. The only way to deal with it for you, young people, is to be on top of it. And it is not enough for you to say, I'm doing law, I will study law. I'm doing computer science, I'll do computer science. I'm very happy to know the name of this university. Integrated learning, multidisciplinary learning. And you can't do that by exchanging textbooks or attending everybody else's class. You will have to do it through digital technology. And the more integrated your learning and studying and research would be, the more competitive you would become in the time to come. I hope I answered your question. Any other question?
So he's here for some more time. We can keep this chat going. Thank you so much, Ambassador Rajiv Bhatia, for gracing this occasion and delivering the inaugural address for the IILM Samvaad series. And thank you everyone who has given your undivided attention for the conversation. And I'm hopeful that we'll have many more such multidisciplinary conversations happening in the university. And on behalf of all the faculty, staff, and the students of IILM University, Greater Noida, I extend my heartfelt gratitude to you, Ambassador Rajiv Bhatia, for delivering the inaugural address. And I request the Honorable Vice Chancellor of IILM University, Greater Noida, to kindly felicitate the guest. Thank you so much, ma'am. Thank you so much, ma'am. Thank you. So we close this session, and Ambassador is around for a quick chat with you. And thank you so much, all of you. You can rewatch the session in YouTube. If any of you need it, please reach out.